Surveillance is a critical component of many careers, such as lifeguarding and radar operations. This study explores whether internal factors, namely mental health and trauma experience, can also influence surveillance performance. The role of the lifeguard is to look for signs of drowning behavior. There are a few strategies lifeguards use. The 5-minute scanning strategy is where lifeguards continuously scan their zone in 5-minute increments using a scanning pattern of their choice followed by a head count. Lifeguards follow the 10-20 protection rule. This gives them 10 seconds to detect drowning and 20 seconds to rescue. But it has been found that lifeguards can take up to 1 minute to decipher if someone is drowning in the water. During this minute, they are searching for the active drowning response. This is defined by flailing arms, bobbing body, and no progress being made through the water. They also look for a head tilted towards the sky. Lifeguards can be responsible for watching up to 50 people at once, sometimes even more. Time is critical. If they are looking in one area for drowning responses, they could be missing someone drowning in another area of the water. Lifeguards struggle to see everyone at once. After time, this task can become strenuous and lifeguards can become bored and tired. Lifeguards often miss serious events and bystanders will notice first. The multiple object tracking shows us that attention is limited. Only about 5 items can be tracked at once. Past research only focuses on videos of people swimming or static images. This can be a problem due to extraneous variables. It also doesn't involve anyone drowning. No one has ever explored mental health disorders on lifeguarding. This is very important to look at. For instance, anxiety and depression make up 18.1% of society in the United States. Those with anxiety and depression have a tendency to go internally and get stuck in their heads. This can be dangerous when it comes to lifeguarding, where the purpose of the job is to look externally. This research is the simplest rendition of the task when it comes to lifeguarding. No one is put at risk, and it tightly allows for you to manipulate factors which can be difficult to do in real life. Personality and mental health variables are likely to impact search performance, either because they bias attention towards internal thought processes and away from the environment, potentially producing distraction and therefore worse performance, or because they bias attention towards the environment under conditions of threat, potentially producing better performance in tasks that are stimulated to be critical. Understanding the impact of these variables on a stimulated search task where people's lives are not at risk is key to understanding whether lifeguards affected by these constructs may perform better or worse than lifeguards without them. Depression has been associated with diminished selective attention. Anxiety may enhance attention to perceived environmental threat. Significant life stressors and trauma may variably alter how attention is deployed and scenes are searched. Conscientiousness may improve detection rates due to a desire to perform well or may be associated with errors. Neuroticism may reduce attention to relevant stimuli due to decreased intentional disengagement. The search task itself may produce negative emotions and increase arousal due to its difficulty. This research tested how each of these variables interacted with several stimulus variables to affect detection accuracy and response time. This study consisted of 26 participants, almost all non-lifeguards. The average age was 21 years old. Anxiety may make individuals more attentive to the environment or more motivated to perform well. For anxiety, it is possible that accuracy will be higher for individuals with higher levels of anxiety than those with lower levels of anxiety. Or the opposite pattern could be observed if anxiety instead pulls attention away from the environment. It is expected that individuals with high levels of depression will have lower accuracy than individuals with lower levels of depression. Stress is an experience driven by the activation of the body's sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight response. And chronic stress in particular can have a negative impact on performance due to attention being diverted from the task or fatigue associated with the condition. These 3 variables will be assessed using the depression, anxiety, and stress scale. Anxiety can be a trait or a state. The state trait anxiety inventory will be used to measure trait anxiety administered at baseline before the drowning detection task, and state anxiety, measured immediately before beginning the drowning detection task and immediately upon completion of the task. People with a history of significant life stressors or traumatic events are likely to process and respond to the world differently than those who have not. The PTSD checklist and life events checklists are self-report inventories that together assess the severity of each of the DSM-5 defined post-traumatic stress symptoms. The mini international personality item pool will be used as a general measure of personality traits in order to determine whether specific traits, for example, conscientiousness and neuroticism, measured at baseline predict greater or lower accuracy in the task. Conscientiousness would likely be associated with wanting to perform the task well, and thus people with high levels of this variable are likely to have higher accuracy than those with low levels of this variable. Neuroticism might decrease accuracy due to the disruption to attention caused by the strong negative emotions that are frequently experienced. For the remaining traits, openness and extroversion and agreeableness, it is unclear whether they would be an impact on search performance. Those scoring in the 30th percentile and below will be considered low, and those scoring in the 70th percentile and above will be considered high. This is how participants measured their arousal and valence after each block. To study this, a surveillance task was developed that simulates lifeguard surveillance. The participants were almost entirely non-lifeguards. They were tasked with detecting and then locating an item that drowned, defined as stopping motion or disappearing. They manipulated several variables for this search task: set size, a sparse 4 versus a more cluttered 12, type of movement, predictable lap swimming or unpredictable meandering, drowning type, stop or disappear, time since the last target, 12 to 18 seconds or 42 through 48 seconds, and speed change prior to drowning. They remain the same speed or slowed down for 5 seconds prior to the drowning. Set size and type of movement were blocked in a counterbalanced order based on participant number, so there were 4 total blocks containing 16 drowning incidents. I'm about to play a video demonstrating the 12 meandering shape conditions, which first shows a disappeared drowning, which they successfully detect quickly because it slowed down prior to the drowning. Here they go, and accurately detect it. The second one, if you look in the upper left corner, you will see that they did not detect it at the time, but realized that one of the items was missing a short time before the trial timed out at 10 seconds. You can see them point to the opposite spot of the screen. Before completing the surveillance task, participants completed several measures of mental health and trauma experience. Participants who were at the 30th percentile or below were considered low in that construct, and participants who were at the 70th percentile and above were considered high in that construct. Accuracy and response time in the surveillance task were examined as a function of surveillance task variables and these mental health variables. People who experience rhythmic lap swimming motion report lower physiological arousal than those who experience unpredictable meandering motion. Movement type did not affect arousal with only 4 shapes, but did with 12 shapes. Monitoring 12 shapes moving unpredictably was more physiologically arousing than 12 shapes moving rhythmically. Participants with low levels of depression were much better to detect the drowning when a lap swimming shape slowed, but much worse to detect the drowning when a meandering shape slowed. Those with high trait anxiety had the lowest accuracy with 12 shapes swimming predictable laps, while those with low trait anxiety had the lowest accuracy if the 12 shapes were meandering unpredictably. Participants with high PTSD symptomology performed equally well with stop and disappearing targets, while those with low PTSD symptomology had lower detection rates with disappearing targets. Participants with higher PTSD symptomology were faster to detect the drowning when the shape did not change its speed compared to participants with lower PTSD symptomology. No difference was seen if the shape slowed down. Participants with high trauma history were slowest detecting drowning among 12 shapes moving unpredictably. Participants with low trauma history were fastest with 4 shapes swimming predictable laps. Participants with high levels of neuroticism were more accurate at detecting drowning among 12 shapes compared to those with low neuroticism. The opposite was seen for 4 shapes. Participants with high levels of neuroticism had higher accuracy detecting the more difficult disappearing targets compared to those with low neuroticism. No difference was observed with targets that stopped. Participants with high neuroticism were quicker to detect drowning when the shape did not change speed prior to drowning than when it slowed. Participants with high conscientiousness responded slower to targets that appeared after a short delay in meandering context. Participants with low conscientiousness responded slower to targets that appeared after a long delay. Some key limitations of this study is that the sample size was relatively small at 26 participants. Some of the tests were underpowered, likely due to the small sample size. Because the study was run online due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there is no guarantee that participants were fully engaged in the task. The study does not replicate the demands of surveillance tasks in the field where a failure of detection results in someone's death. Overall, those with mental health challenges perform differently than those without. Further research should investigate the prevalence of these mental health issues among those employed in surveillance careers. Examining eye movement patterns will help to better understand how mental health influences surveillance performance.